Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Rob Shallenberger says the road to success is based on 4 words. Today, he'll tell us what those are. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Bill, and thank you to everyone that's tuning in, and let's see if we can have an awesome half hour together.
You and I talked a few minutes before the show, and I told you I love the title of your book. In fact, we could just tell people the title, and then we can talk about recipes or the local baseball team. So you tell us, what's the title of your book?
That's it. You hit the nail on the head, Bill. 4 words that says it all, and that is do what matters most.
And I love that. And honestly, while we'll expound on it, I'll ask you some questions. It sounds so direct, so common sense, but I think the first thing I read in your book is that 68 or 70% of managers says that time priority was their number one challenge.
Yeah, this was
these are the managers. These are the bosses.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bill. And it was fascinating. You know, we've had the chance to work with hundreds of organizations around the world, even presidents of countries. And several years ago, as we were training and speaking for different groups, it became very apparent that when it came to time management productivity, this was a big deal. And so this really started a whole nother arm of research for us around now do what matters most, which is really zeroed in on time management, productivity, words that people have heard a lot about. But the question is, how often were they being done? Like vision, goals, weekly planning. Those are terms we've all heard a million times, right? Well, we wanted to find out how often are they actually being done? Like, let's look behind the scenes and pull back the curtains. And so, in our survey of thousands of managers, it was surprising, Bill, that 68% of them felt like prioritizing their time was their number one challenge.
And, I have to admit that I sit here sometime and think, well, I have a busy morning. First, I have to get up and eat breakfast. And then I am going to take the dog out to do her business in, the local dog walking areas. Then I might go for a walk myself to get some exercise, watch a little television, and basically 4 or 5 hours are shot. And if I look at that, other than the dog walking, I've done nothing really productive or that I couldn't consolidate into 2 or 3 or 4, minutes, etc. So I really think the way you've set that up is beautiful. And something else I want to make sure I understand. You said that just by going through your book, certain habits can increase performance and productivity by 30 to 50%. Did I get that right?
That's exactly it, Bill. And if we want to get into a little bit more detail on that at some point in here, I'll say that 30 to 50% is very conservative. The actual numbers are more like 80 to 100%, but I can't say that up front or people will,
they won't believe you, but I'll tell you, with me, it's probably more like 150 to 300%. But just for our audience, I'm going to say out loud that if you like to look at things mathematically the way I do, if you were making $100,000 a year, a 10 or 15% increase, and that's even more conservative than the numbers you gave, that means our salary just went up $15,000. I don't think anybody would mind or complain or would even negotiate on that. They'd say, I'll take it. I certainly would. And you're telling us we can do far better, double, triple that. And really, you make it quite simple. And having gone through your book, this is no phony stuff or some weirdo type thing that we have to look up to the sky and howl at night. These are real rules. You kind of break everything down to 3 big what would we say, habits. Can you tell us what those are?
Yeah, and that's exactly it, Bill. It's not rocket science on one hand, but on the other hand, for as much as they're talked about, they're almost never being done. And so there's power in simplicity, and there's also power in a mindset and a willingness to actually test a habit and see what impact it might have in a person's life. Because what's the worst that could happen? It increases productivity by 10%. And I'm actually, Bill, before answering that question, I'm just going to build on what you said there. When you talk about a percentage increase, a person that implements these 3 do what matters most habits will accomplish this year 800 to 1,000 additional things that otherwise wouldn't have happened without these habits.
Oh my gosh.
And all with less stress. And so it is powerful. It's not like you said, I like the howling at the moon analogy, but it's not that. These are really concrete, powerful habits that anyone can do if they'll first learn them and then second, apply them. And here are the habits. Number 1 is to develop a written personal vision. Now, again, how many times have you heard someone say, find your why, find your purpose, your passion, your vision? Well, again, for as much as it's been talked about, it's rarely being done. And I can tell you from having met with thousands of people, there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. There's a fear of sitting down. There's making the time to do it. I'd say for most people, though, it's not their fault because it's a skill set that we learn how to do. How do you actually do it? And so that's habit number one, is to develop a written personal vision. And chapters 3 and 4 of the book are dedicated to the how-to, the why. And we'll walk you through very specifically how to do that. The second habit is what we call roles and goals. And again, goals are talked about often, but only 10% of people have both personal and written professional goals. And so, again, there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. And sometimes there's this initial reaction to goals saying, oh yeah, done it. They didn't work. Well, it's just like anything else. It needs to be done the right way. And so I would ask, everyone to listen to this, Bill. Imagine how great it would feel to wake up in the morning, truly being able to identify what matters most in your life and focusing on those things. And that's habit two.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. It's like what you said, Bill, talking about the dog, that was a great reference to your story. So habit number 2 is to set roles and goals for this year, the remainder of 2021, and then do the same going into 2022 as we start the next year. And the third habit, and by far and away the most important habit, is pre-week planning. And this is what takes all these good intentions and ideas down to the daily and weekly level to where the rubber really meets the road. And see, the question for all of us is, are you as a listener doing what matters most this week? And not just in the professional environment, but taking care of yourself, showing up in your important relationships, whether it's a spouse or a partner or children or whatever your relationship might be. And so those are the 3 habits: develop a written personal vision, roles and goals, and pre-week planning.
Rob, I'll tell you, I'm a baseball fan. I look at the game and I say, why didn't the fella use this metric or to hit the ball to right field or left field? Or why didn't they do something that fits in with the metrics? And you've given us some numbers. And when I look at them, it's almost like, why wouldn't you follow your advice? You say only 2% of people have a written personal vision. And I'm thinking that might be even high because I don't even know anybody in all my years who has the written personal vision.
That's right.
Less than 10% have written goals. And perhaps the scariest one is 80% of people don't have a process to plan their week. And as I was kidding with you, that reminds me of the golf story where they show all the golf carts starting at once, and it's supposed to be all these executives and they're smashing into one another because nobody knows who goes left, right, or center, So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And look, Bill, the reason why this is important is, especially since the pandemic, anxiety has skyrocketed. Mental health has become a really big issue. Incidents of anxiety and depression, a lot of other things, relationships have suffered, people have lost loved ones, and yet there's still so much left in our lives. And so the thought is this: we will either lead a life by design or we will live a life by default. And life is too precious to live a life by default and just wing it day to day. And, it's kind of funny. We can laugh at this because I think most of us have been there at some point in our lives where it's just very reactive day to day. And that's what we found, is that most people, their time management process consisted of to-do lists and sticky notes. And that's very reactive by nature. And these 3 habits, when someone applies them, are truly life-changing because they shift the whole paradigm and focus from living that reactive life by default and just showing up, to whatever happens, to leading a life by design. And I'll tell you, Bill, these 3 habits have never been brought together and presented in this way to make it so easy for someone to apply them. And here's the unique perspective in which we apply these habits. We invite everybody reading the book to look at their life through the lens of the 5 to 7 roles that matter most to them. So if you're listening and you have children, one of your key roles in life, or the hats you wear, would be a parent. If you're in a relationship, partner or spouse, personal is the most important role because that's us taking care of ourselves. So when you look at your life through the lens of those different roles, you can develop a vision for each role. That becomes like the North Star. There's a passion and an internal compass inside of us when you have that written. The second is to identify the 1 to 4 specific goals within each role. How will you measure success this year? And then we bring it all together in that third habit of pre-week planning, which is what matters most to you this week in each of those roles, and when will you do those things? And it's extra powerful when it aligns with your goals and your vision. So just imagine, being a part of the now 1% of people that apply all 3 of these habits together, and what level of focus and clarity and peace and low stress would come into your life with having that kind of clarity and direction.
Oh, absolutely. And the more I do have clarity and direction I found in my own life, I feel better. Everything falls into place.
Yes.
And it's just like a comfortable pair of shoes. Rob, before we go further, in fact, I want to mention two things. One, I love that saying that you talked about, a life by design or a life by default. And I think for our audience, we always have one or two takeaways during the show. If nothing else, write that down on a sticky and put it on your computer or on your desk or on your car door. And every time you do something, just think, is this by design or default? And even if we can change, I would guess, maybe a third of those, we're going to be a lot more successful. At this point in the show, we want to remind our listeners, though, that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Today, our guest is Rob Shallenberger. He is the author of Do What Matters Most. And Rob, we're going to ask you, one, where we can get this book, and two, a website where we can learn more about it.
Yeah, perfect. Probably the easiest place is just go to Amazon. You can certainly get it in the bookstores, Barnes & Noble, anywhere else. But Amazon is probably the easiest. Just obviously go to Amazon, search for Do What Matters Most. And then there's two websites. BecomingYourBest.com is our website, that has all of the different training, keynotes, those options. But there's an app I want to tell you about at some point, Bill, in the show, and I'd hope that our listeners will go check this out. And that is DoWhatMattersMostApp.com. And that is an extension that can be uploaded to Google Chrome, Outlook, that will bring all three of these habits together right on your desktop computer. So DoWhatMattersMostApp.com.
And I'm just thinking this is great for anybody, whether they're in business. Obviously, if you're in someone like sales or where your production actually affects your income directly, that's terrific. Yeah. But for a student in school, just to say what's going to matter most, I can sit around and waste some time or prepare for the football game, the track meet, or the test that's coming up. So now you have a story in your book about someone who really followed your advice and had very good results, Amy. Can you tell us about Amy?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of Amy's in the world. And to a degree, I think we've all been Amy. And Amy was a senior director at American Express, and she'd been there for almost 20 years. And throughout that 20 years, she was really a rising star. Every position that she held, she excelled. She was amazing until she got into this senior director role. And then her whole world shifted because she said for the first time in her life, she was no longer able to stay on top of it all. In other words, there was so many things bombarding her at work that she felt like she was sinking. And you can imagine how that trickled into her personal life. She had a special needs daughter who she felt like she wasn't spending enough time with. Her relationship with her husband began to suffer. They weren't going on dates anymore. And her words were, I just didn't have time. Our famous words that we like to use. And then you can also imagine what happened in her personal life regarding her health and things like that. She used to be avid about exercising and running. Well, all of that began to slip through the cracks as she was working these 12-hour days. And you can imagine the burnout and all of the other feelings that went along with this. And she was just thirsting for a solution. In her words, she said that she'd looked all over and tried all of these different things, gratitude journals, choose one thing to focus on that day. And while so many things were good and helped her in some small way, none of them solved her fundamental issue until she came across the book. After going through these three habits, she said, I finally felt what I found is the solution. I'm so excited and so thrilled to be able to have something that's going to give me direction that I feel will be able to bring this balance back into my life. And so we asked her to write us an email 30 days later after applying the habits. And this is what she said. She said, that was a not only a challenging process, but such an exciting, invigorating process to develop my vision, and especially by role. So she asked, well, what does her vision look like as a senior director at American Express? How about as a parent to her special needs daughter? How about as a wife and for herself personally? And she says that was the beginning because there was a power that flowed within her once she identified what that vision looked like. And she realized that almost her entire life was out of alignment with that vision. And then that drove, what she found in chapters 5 and 6 were her roles and goals. In other words, she went through the process outlined in chapter 6 of the book and really identified for her what mattered most that year in each role. And up to that point, she had never even thought about that, right? Just like the statistics, like most people. And it was that act of identifying what mattered most to her that then caused her to get a laser-like focus on, okay, well, how am I going to show up for my daughter and my wife and my husband and at work? And that was the catalyst then for pre-week planning. And every week, the act of her sitting down and doing her pre-week planning, as outlined in chapters 8 and 9, she looked at her roles, she'd identify what mattered most that week, and then scheduled the times, also leaving room for flexibility. And, You read about that in chapters 8 and 9. So what was the end result? At the end, a month later, her supervisor came into her and said, Amy, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because I've seen a total transformation in you. The energy you bring to work, you've got your team performing at the best level that they performed at in a long time. And so whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And she said, I was on cloud 9 because a month ago, he had brought her into his office and the discussion was very different. It was, basically, if we don't get this figured out, we're going to have to find another person for this position. So in 30 days, total transformation at work. In her personal life, she said, we're dating again. With my husband, we got the fire back. I've started making time for one-on-one time with my daughter each week, whereas, for the last several months, that hadn't happened. She's exercising again. She's taking care of herself. She's in such a better mental and emotional place herself. And it's easy to ask, well, what changed? Well, I'll tell you, it's a mindset and a skill set. So number one, her focus changed and she had a desire. And number two, she applied a skill set. It was a habit that she had never implemented in her life that helped her take what up to that point was organized chaos and shed those things that weren't applicable to her and do what mattered most. And for her, life changing is exactly how she would describe that process.
And just as a side benefit, I guess, because I remember this from the story, didn't she also lose 5 or 10 pounds in that month?
Oh, yeah. She lost weight. She started getting her health back.
And I think all of us love that part of it. If that jacket fits or suit fits just a little bit better, it makes us all feel a little more empowered, et cetera, et cetera. There's a term in your book called task saturation. What is that and how prevalent is it today? Yeah,
so I had the chance to fly F-16s in the Air Force for 11 years. And there's a fighter pilot term that we use called task saturation. And that's when there's so many things happening in the cockpit that you can no longer process, everything that's going on. You've got a radar, you're trying to fly the jet, you've got all these radio calls coming in. So there's just so much happening in the cockpit. And unfortunately, what happens when a pilot gets task saturated is oftentimes what matters most or the priorities slip through the cracks. Your face and eyes are down in the radar trying to lock on a target that's 40 miles away, and you don't realize there's a mountain right in front of you that you're about to hit. And I unfortunately know people and have friends who have died because they were task saturated in the cockpit. They misprioritized and had that kind of accident. And it is tragic. And in the book, we relate that to life. Well, how many of us feel that sense of task saturation where there's so many competing demands and you feel like, they're all slipping through the cracks? Or how do you balance all of these things? The new term now is work-life balance. How do we balance and juggle all of these priorities? And knowing that task saturation is very real in our lives, these three do what matters most habits will help us step back to reduce task saturation, reduce stress, and really get a laser focus on what matters most. And it's such a powerful feeling when we can recognize and eliminate that feeling of task saturation.
And I know you mentioned this in your book, but as we're doing these things too, one kind of enforces the other. We feel better about ourselves. I'm sure Amy, as she lost the weight, everybody seems to feel better when they lose a few pounds. She's doing better at work. The work is probably getting easier because she's in the flow, and rather than just looking at it as a mountain coming down on her, she's handling it. So each one reinforces the other, and like a team, it starts winning when they all play together.
Love that, Bill. Love the way you said that.
Well, I'm stealing it from your book, so you get the credit for it. You mentioned that doing what matters most is a mindset. How hard is that to lock into people when you're giving a seminar, and does it last after a day or two?
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the most common things that we hear is, how many times have you listened to a podcast or listened to something else or attended a seminar or read a book, and you had this temporary motivation where you were all excited to do something. And then what happens 2 weeks later? Most of the time that tends to fizzle out and go away, and we're right back to where we were. That's what's powerful about the habits, is it gives you a sustainable process that you can use literally for the rest of your life. This is not designed to be a flash in the pan experience. These become habits that you adopt for the rest of your life. And when you talk about the mindset, Bill, there's two parts to the mindset. When we start a seminar, I share this quote that goes like this: good, better, best, never let it rest till the good is better and the better is best. And it's each one of us asking ourselves, wherever we are today, how can we show up better, especially in these various roles? And there's two different ways to approach that quote. One is to say, I'm fine the way I am. I'm good enough. Well, comments like that cap our progress. How are we ever going to get better if that's our mindset? Versus, what can I do to be a better parent? a better spouse? How do we show up in our job in ways that we haven't before? How do we engage and make our company better? And as soon as we start asking those questions, then the habits become very powerful. And so we've got to be able to set aside that cynic or that skeptic that we all have and be willing to test the habits. And the other part of the mindset equation is having the discipline to apply the habit. And there's several things that we've included in there that will help with that. And that's why that extension for Google Chrome becomes so powerful, is because it's a tool that will help us be consistent with the habit. And so that's what I mean when I reference the mindset.
Rob, this is a perfect chance for us to let our audience know, and I'm going to tell them, get that pen or pencil out and write it down. One, that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, but the name you want to get down today is Rob Shallenberger. He is the author of Do What Matters Most, a very easy, simple title. Rob, we're going to ask you where you get the book, and is there a website where we can learn more?
Yeah, get the book on Amazon, probably the easiest place. Search for Do What Matters Most. BecomingYourBest.com, tons of resources for you personally or for a team. And for the pre-week planning extension that brings all three of these Do What Matters Most habits together, DoWhatMattersMostApp.com. You can use that extension right on your desktop.
And if our audience didn't get it, once more before the end of the show, within the next 10 minutes or so, we'll ask you for that information. And I would urge anybody get it down, because even if you think, I don't need it today, 2 weeks from now, your son, your nephew in college, someone starting a job is going to need it. And the one neat thing, as you mentioned, we're setting our own goals and rules and vision. You're not telling us to run a 4-minute mile. We could be happy with a 10 or 20-minute mile. And if it advances our life, that's really what we all want, in the direction that, whatever that might be, the ministry, medical school, or, going to college or a profession. Rob, in any business, in any application of moving ahead in life, we always have some enemies. And I know you have a section. What are the enemies of doing what matters most? What gets in the way?
It really comes back to the mindset, Bill. And that is, anytime we're using the words, I'm fine the way I am, I'm good enough. Procrastination. Most of the challenges in the mindset. So how do we counter, those enemies of the mindset of procrastination, complacency? Because another fighter pilot term is complacency kills. In other words, in the fighter pilot world, if we get complacent, we really are at risk of having something bad happen, such as running the mountain or having a midair collision. Well, getting too comfortable or complacent in life can have some similar impacts. And so procrastination, complacency, misprioritization, I'll do it later. And so here's the question is, how do you counterbalance the enemies of that mindset, the do what matters most mindset? And I would say this, my philosophy is take action now. When someone gives me a book recommendation, they always kind of raise an eyebrow, because I immediately take out my phone. I immediately go to Amazon and I say, hold on. I literally pause the conversation and I order the book right then. Because what happens if we wait a day or two? We had a good intention, but oftentimes that good intention slides back into the back burner and it never happens. And so take action now. Invest in yourself. And you want to hear something crazy on this, Bill? 43% of college graduates will never read another book the rest of their life. And 80% of households here in the United States did not invest in a book last year. And there's a term we like to use, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. We're kind of like a computer in our brain. Our brain's such a powerful instrument. And if we put garbage in, then that's exactly what we should expect out, versus greatness in, greatness out. And if we can fill our minds with greatness, then we can expect greatness on the back end as well. And so when someone gives me a book recommendation, I immediately pause the conversation. I go and I order the book, because I know if it shows up and I put that on my desk, that I'm going to read it. But if I wait and procrastinate a day or two, odds of it getting done are pretty low. And that's why that app, the Do What Matters Most app, the extension is so powerful. Same concept.
When I see someone doing that right away, I know they have some direction in their life. And if I mention a book, and I often recommend books because of the people we meet on this show, as soon as I see them writing it down, I know they care about it. And mentally, I kind of put them on a future list that, hey, if I ever come across another good book, I'll pass it on to you. Awesome. I'm a numbers person, and you have an anecdote in your book about a sales organization you worked with. And if I recall, they were doing about 17 sales, either a day or a month. I forget the time period, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So could you tell us that and the difference that this program made to them?
Yeah, company averaging 17 sales a day. And think of this way. We are kind of like an elastic band as humans. If an elastic band sits in a drawer, it's probably going to get stale and break. That's not what they're designed for. At the same time, you can't overstretch an elastic band or it will break. So there's this perfect level of tension that an elastic band was designed for. And I believe we as humans are similar. We're designed to be stretched, not overstretched, but stretched. And this group was averaging 17 sales a day, and they were very happy and comfortable with that. Complacent, if you will. And that was a very good, comfortable place for them to be. Well, we spent 4 hours with them that day and walking through each one of the 3 Do What Matters Most habits. They started on their personal vision by role. They got clear about their goals and pre-week planning. And we challenged them because we saw the numbers in the data. We knew they were capable of it. We challenged them to set a goal to average 34 sales per day by the end of the month. And at first, you could imagine the typical reaction. Oh, man, I don't know. The most we've ever hit is like 39 in a day. And I don't know if we can average that. There's that skepticism, right? or cynicism and being skeptical a little bit, if you will. And it was pretty funny because their sales manager wrote us the next day. And I've got to give them credit too. They were gamers, right? They said, all right, we'll do it. We're in. And their sales manager called the next day and said she couldn't believe it. They hit 41 sales that day, shattered their previous record. At the end of the month, she called back, sales manager, astounded, and said, you won't believe this. We hit exactly an average of 34 sales per day by the end of the month. That was our average. For that single sales team, that resulted in $2.4 million in additional revenue. And because those sales reps are commission-based, that was more money in their pocket. And I love the way you said this, Bill, earlier. Not only were they making more money that month, but as they applied these habits, it impacted every other area of their life. Their health was better. They were focusing and doing things in their relationships that hadn't happened. And so you ask, well, how does that happen? Well, it all ties into one. And that's the power of looking at our life holistically and having a balance of success stories.
Rob, I really want to thank you. I love that story. And I just want to reiterate for our audience, they went from 17 to 34. That was the goal. So they achieved a massive goal. They doubled and then the goal became the average within that same month. And I heard what you said. This was a sales team. This wasn't the whole business that made 2.4 million. This was a team within the business. So if we can bring that down to ourselves, you see the local brokerage, it's usually the Smith team or the Johnson team, and they'll show you 3 or 4 brokers. If any of us could even do that for 10 or 20% of an increase, and these people more than doubled what the business they were doing for the organization and for their own personal income, they must have moved up in status, in tax brackets and everything, but that's a great problem. Rob, we want to thank you for being with us. Again, I want to remind our audience, our guest has been Rob Shallenberger. He's the author of Do What Matters Most, and that's a great title to keep in mind. Do what he did, put it in your phone, because if you follow that, you're going to have some riches. Rob, thank you so much. And give us that website.
Yeah, becomingyourbest.com, and then go get the extension for your either Chrome or Outlook at dowhatmattersmostapp.com. And Bill, do you mind if I take 20 seconds just to share one final comment?
Real quick.
This is about scheduling our priorities rather than prioritizing our schedules and having a balanced success story across the many areas of our life. And once you apply the habit to your life, like you said, Bill, we invite you then go out and get a copy of the book for your children, for your coworkers, and for those who matter most to you, and share it with them.
I'm all for that. Rob, thank you so much for being with us. We'd like to remind our audience you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. We ask you to please join us again next week at the same time when we'll continue our journey to success.